The popular image of Hitler portrays a man obsessed with conquering Britain. However, the truth is more nuanced. Hitler always saw Britain as a potential ally, a fellow Aryan nation. He admired their empire and felt they could share the world. Invading Britain was never part of his grand plan. He believed that after the fall of France, Britain, isolated and alone, would see the futility of further conflict and sue for peace. His hope was to offer them generous terms, securing their empire in exchange for their acquiescence to his dominance of mainland Europe. This hope proved misplaced. Churchill's Britain, fueled by defiance and a refusal to bow to tyranny, chose to fight on. The Battle of Britain, a testament to the courage of the RAF, shattered Hitler's hopes for a swift negotiated peace. Faced with British intransigence, Hitler reluctantly turned his attention to a plan that had always been on the back burner, the invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sealion. Operation Sealion was a monumental undertaking, a vast logistical and military challenge. The plan called for landing around 90,000 men, along with tanks and supplies, on a stretch of the English coast between Ramsgate and Worthing. This invasion force would then push inland, aiming to capture London and crush British resistance. The operation was fraught with risk and relied on several key assumptions. Firstly, it assumed German air superiority over the English Channel and southern England. The Luftwaffe needed to neutralise the RAF, preventing them from harassing the invasion fleet and providing cover for German troops once ashore. Secondly, it relied on the German Navy's ability to protect the invasion fleet from the Royal Navy, a force larger and more experienced in naval warfare. Finally, it depended on the ability of the German army to land successfully, overcome the defending British forces and establish a secure bridgehead before British reinforcements could arrive. Each of these assumptions proved problematic, highlighting the gamble Hitler was taking. Beyond the military challenges, the English Channel itself posed a formidable obstacle. Even in ideal conditions, the Channel is a treacherous stretch of water, known for its strong currents, unpredictable weather, and rough seas. Assembling and escorting a vast invasion fleet across this body of water, under constant threat from the Royal Navy and RAF, was a logistical nightmare. The Germans simply lacked the naval power to guarantee the safe passage of their troops and equipment. The Royal Navy, though smaller than the German army, possessed a key advantage: experience. British sailors were highly trained and battle-hardened, accustomed to the challenges of naval warfare. The German Navy, by contrast, was largely untested, its crews lacking the experience and seamanship of their British counterparts. Moreover, the Royal Navy had a secret weapon, their network of sonar stations, which could detect German submarines and warships, giving them a crucial edge in any naval engagement. Before any invasion could be contemplated, Germany needed to achieve air superiority over southern England. This meant neutralizing the RAF, crippling their ability to attack the invasion fleet or provide air support to British ground forces. The Luftwaffe, confident in their ability to crush the RAF, launched a relentless air campaign in the summer of 1940, the Battle of Britain. What followed was one of the most pivotal air campaigns in history, a clash of ideologies and technology that would decide the fate of nations. The Luftwaffe, initially focusing on RAF airfields and infrastructure, found themselves facing fierce resistance. The RAF, though outnumbered, had several advantages. They were fighting on home turf. Their pilots could return to the fight if shot down, and crucially, they had the Spitfire. The Spitfire, a marvel of engineering, proved more than a match for the German Messerschmitt Bf 109, its agility and firepower turning the tide of the battle. The Luftwaffe suffered heavy losses, their plans for a swift and decisive victory dashed against the courage and skill of the RAF. Section 5, a beachhead in Britain. Imagining the unthinkable. Let's for a moment entertain the unthinkable. Germany achieves the impossible. The RAF is neutralized, the Royal Navy crippled, and the German army, ferried across the Channel under a blanket of Luftwaffe protection, establishes a beachhead on British soil. What then? The Germans would face a nation united in defiance. Churchill, a bulldog spirit personified, would rally the British people, inspiring them to fight for every inch of their land. The Home Guard, a citizen army of over 1 million men, would be waiting, armed, and ready to resist the invaders. The German advance inland would be a slog, every village and town transformed into a fortress. British resolve, far from crumbling, would stiffen with every fallen comrade, every bombed-out building. The Germans, accustomed to swift victories on the continent, would find themselves bogged down in a bitter war of attrition, facing an enemy determined to fight to the death. Section 6. The Lion's Fury facing British resistance. The British resistance wouldn't be confined to regular army units. Civilians, armed and trained, would form a vast guerrilla force, melting into the countryside, striking German supply lines and disappearing into the night. The landscape itself, with its hedgerows and rolling hills, would favour the defender. Every village, every copse of trees could conceal a deadly ambush. The German army, trained for blitzkrieg, for rapid advances and overwhelming firepower, would find themselves ill-equipped for this kind of warfare. Their supply lines, already stretched thin across the Channel, would be vulnerable to attack, their tanks and heavy artillery hampered by the terrain. The British, fighting on home soil, knowing every inch of the land, would have a crucial advantage in this asymmetric conflict. Section 7. A reverse Dunkirk, trapped in enemy territory. As the German advance stalled, as casualties mounted and supplies dwindled, a chilling possibility would emerge, a reverse Dunkirk. The British, bolstered by reinforcements from across the Empire, would launch a counter-offensive, pushing the Germans back towards the coast. The Luftwaffe, depleted by losses and struggling to maintain air superiority, would be unable to provide effective cover. The Royal Navy, having regrouped and reinforced, would control the Channel, cutting off the German army from reinforcements and escape. Trapped on the beaches, their backs to the sea, the German army would face annihilation. The British, fueled by a year of defiance and the desire for revenge, would fight with a ferocity that would shock even the battle-hardened Germans. The beaches of southern England, once envisioned as the gateway to conquest, would become a graveyard of German ambition. Section 8. The Eastern Front's fate. A respite for the Soviets? The ramifications of a failed invasion of Britain would extend far beyond the English Channel. The German army, bloodied and demoralized, would have suffered a defeat of catastrophic proportions. Their aura of invincibility, carefully cultivated through a string of swift victories, would be shattered. This defeat would have profound implications for the Eastern Front, buying the Soviet Union precious time to prepare for the inevitable German invasion. With the Wehrmacht bogged down in Britain, Hitler's attention would have been diverted from his primary objective, the destruction of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, the planned invasion of the Soviet Union, would have been delayed, perhaps indefinitely. This delay would have given the Soviets time to learn from the mistakes of the Western Allies, to fortify their defences and to mobilise their vast resources. The Eastern Front, when it eventually ignited, would have been a very different conflict. Section 9. A world transformed. The implications of invasion. A failed German invasion of Britain would have sent shockwaves across the globe. The United States, watching from across the Atlantic, would have been emboldened by British resilience. The isolationist sentiment in the US, strong in the early years of the war, would have been dealt a decisive blow. The US, recognizing the Nazi threat to democracy and freedom, would have been more likely to enter the war sooner, tipping the balance of power decisively against the Axis powers. The global balance of power would have shifted. A weakened Germany, bogged down in a two-front war, facing a resurgent Soviet Union in the east and a united US-backed alliance in the west, would have found their dreams of world domination crumbling. The course of the 20th century, shaped by the outcome of this global conflict, would have been irrevocably altered. After the failed invasion of Britain, Hitler puts Operation Barbarossa on hold to rebuild his shattered military. Stalin, watching these events from the east, decides to take this opportunity to prepare for a Soviet invasion of Germany. The Soviet factories churn out tanks, planes and artillery at an unprecedented rate, and Red Army soldiers train rigorously for the impending conflict. In 1942, the Red Army is given the go-ahead. The Soviet war machine, now a formidable force, moves westward with a singular goal: to crush the Nazi regime. The Eastern Front ignites with a ferocity never before seen. Soviet forces, hardened by years of preparation and driven by a fierce resolve, push into German-held territories. Cities like Stalingrad and Leningrad, cities of significant strategic importance, now become launch pads for a relentless offensive. The German Wehrmacht, already stretched thin from previous campaigns, struggles to hold back the tide. The Red Army's advance is relentless, and the sheer numbers and determination of Soviet soldiers overwhelm German defences. The tide of war shifts dramatically as the Soviets reclaim lost ground and push deeper into enemy territory. The Eastern Front becomes a theatre of immense human suffering and heroism, with battles that determine the fate of nations. The surprise Soviet offensive not only devastates German forces but also signals a turning point in the war. The world watches as the once invincible Nazi war machine begins to falter under the weight of the Soviet onslaught. As the Red Army advances, the implications are clear. The collapse of the Third Reich is no longer a distant dream, but an imminent reality. The course of history is being rewritten, and the world braces for the dawn of a new era. In this alternate timeline, the Soviet invasion of Germany catches Hitler completely by surprise. Stalin's bold move leads to a desperate German defense, and a much quicker retreat than in our timeline. The Red Army's unyielding advance leaves the Wehrmacht scrambling, unable to mount a cohesive defense. By May 1944, the war ends before the Allies even have a chance to land troops in Western Europe. The rapid Soviet victory reconfigures the geopolitical landscape. Europe, now largely under Soviet influence, witnesses a dramatic shift in power dynamics. The Iron Curtain descends much earlier and more decisively, enveloping the continent in a new era of Soviet dominance. Eastern Europe becomes a stronghold of communist regimes, with Soviet-backed governments swiftly established. Western Europe, though spared direct Soviet control, finds itself in a precarious position, caught between the ideologies of capitalism and communism. The United States, having prepared for a different kind of war, must now navigate this altered reality. The post-war world is vastly different. The United Nations, formed to prevent future conflicts, is heavily influenced by Soviet interests. The ideological battle between East and West begins much sooner, setting the stage for a Cold War that will shape global politics for decades. The Soviet Union's stronger influence over Europe leads to accelerated technological advancements in space exploration, as both superpowers vie for supremacy. The cultural, political and economic ramifications are profound, with the world watching as two titanic forces redefine the boundaries of power and progress. As the dust settles, one thing is clear. The end of the war marks not just the fall of the Third Reich, but the dawn of a new world order. The echoes of this alternate history resonate through time, reminding us of the delicate balance upon which our reality rests.